In this episode, I'm going to tell you why this new Lightning infill is something you really should know about. I'm going to explain what it does, and more importantly, why it could be perhaps the most important thing added to Cura in 2021. I'm serious, it could be. I happened by chance to notice the new version of Cura the other day after reinstalling Windows. Don't want to go into that. This version of Cura, namely 4.12, seems quite unassuming, with no loud announcements or fanfares that I've seen. Indeed, I wouldn't have known about it if I hadn't needed to reinstall it, and I do keep my eye on these things for obvious reasons. It didn't seem like there was much new stuff in there. There were some things that seemed to be for people who own Ultimaker branded printers, like literally just better profiles. Whatever, but then there was this. Lightning infill. What's that all about then? So I guess they named it Lightning infill because it looks a bit like lightning, but actually the more you look into it, the more you start to think the name doesn't really convey what it actually does. If you look at the release notes, you can see a rather uninspiring statement about high quality top layers with less material. To me though, that's not what's most groundbreaking about these supports. Wait, did I say supports? I did. That wasn't a typo. So, the page links to a paper, and that paper is from a couple of years ago, and it's titled Ribbed Support Vaults for 3D Printing of Hollowed Objects. And I'll link it below. And while it's not catchy, I figure you're at least starting to figure out what this is going to be all about. The paper itself is really well written, and fairly exhaustive, even down to giving you the code for these supports. If you're printing essentially either a non-load bearing part like maybe an ornament, or perhaps a prototype, or even perhaps a mould for casting, you don't need to infill at all. Now I agree, I think infill is often overused in situations where you could use literally none, and perhaps I'll make an entire video on that later. But as we see, it points out that in many circumstances you end up with what's referred to as local minima, or to put it in plain English, bits of the model's exterior, that means the wall, that need support that absolutely wouldn't be covered by bridging because they're lower than any part around them. Or to put it even more bluntly, printing in thin air. Traditionally, this has necessitated a very low density infill, or if you like a stuffing, to keep the model from collapsing in on itself. But this of course is often only needed during printing. Once the plastic is hard, if you've allowed enough outer walls, then you don't need this. So yes, it's basically just infill as support that doesn't get removed afterwards, it's permanent. The paper makes 2 points about this method of using infill as support. The first being that using a coarse grid infill doesn't work that well. And this is absolutely true. While the slicer might add things to make it work better, like extra layers under local minimum points for example, it's not the ideal solution. The ideal solution would be a denser grid to allow the support to be closer to where you're printing in thin air, wherever that might be. Failing to do this will cause sagging in these areas where the supporting infill just isn't close enough. And of course then you have to add more layers on top of that to make up for the sagging, and you get the idea. Or, better idea, why don't we just recognise that support infill is a thing, and essentially just calculate the support backwards? This is exactly what the paper suggests. I mean, that's literally what's going on here. If you've seen my previous videos on tree supports, you will see parallels here, because these ribbed support vaults are pretty much generated like branches of a tree, starting with the part that needs supporting and gradually moving backwards, shrinking down until it meets, get this, the internal wall of the part. That's the thing, because internal support structure is permanent and invisible, you don't have to follow the same rules as you might with external supports. You can support from any part of the model, the internal walls or another part, well, absolutely anything goes. That's the overview of what this so-called lightning infill is based upon. So next question, when do you need to use it? Essentially, any time that you want to print something that doesn't need to be solid. So that would be any of your models, your trinkets, your ornaments, your Pokemon figures, your Christmas baubles. I mean, this is a lot of scope because it includes things that you would previously have not considered printing hollow, because printing hollow previously would not have worked. Take for example this calibration cube. It has a totally flat top, or rather it's not flat enough to be able to bridge. That might work with a cube. The slicer will have a really hard time with this. In fact, that is an understatement. If you see here setting infill to 0, you can see that Cura just comes up with a bridging layer, if you could call it that will absolutely fail. I feel like printing this just to show you. Okay, I did. There you go. Look, complete and utter failure. That's never going to work. So, the hollow version of this cube, which wouldn't print anyway, uses 1.29 meters of filament. And if you use 10% gyroid, which does print, that uses 1.72 meters. And honestly, that doesn't look quite dense enough to me, but it does print out at this scale. Lightning at the same percentage uses just 1.38 meters. And you can really see the benefit of this support infill algorithm. The bulk of the support is being done from the side of the object, so there's much less material being used here. You can see the finished products with a gyroid, and I am going to pronounce it gyroid because I'm British and we do that kind of thing. I don't know whether that's the correct pronunciation, but that's what we're going with. So you can see the finished products, the gyroid on the left and a lightning infill on the right, and while the claims of a better surface aren't necessarily substantiated, I would say because Cura does a lot of work to deal with that, like extra layers and other stuff, you can't really see a difference in the part. And I wouldn't know that the one on the right uses 20% less material. And that's for such a small part. If you scale this up, the savings become absolutely huge. And I must also point out that from a non-practical, non-stress application, you can't really tell it's mostly hollow. The part just doesn't feel that flimsy either, and that's with only 2 walls. Obviously, larger parts will need more walls, and they may reach a point, in fact I expect they will reach a point, where a modest infill may result in less material usage than having several walls. So I suppose that's your one caveat with this lightning infill. It's probably not suitable for making rigid, large parts that are going to be touched or handled. I'm sure you can agree though that this is actually quite a big change in how we're now able to print low-stress parts like trinkets and models and a lot of the things that we do 3D print all the time. So I kind of think that this should have been given a lot more fanfare and a lot more exposure. This is really quite an important functionality. So with Christmas just around the corner, when you print all those things that we always seem to end up printing at this time of year, perhaps consider using lightning supports and save yourself a huge amount of material without compromising the aesthetics. What do you think? Will you use it? Comment below whether you think so or not. And I will see you next time. Thank you for watching.